Hi, it's Gary Ford from Tiger Hobbies Limited, and welcome to part 2 of our HAWKER Hurricane series. Now, this video series is going to be in two episodes, but I've now decided to split it into three episodes. So episode 2 will be the HAWKER Hurricane in the Mediterranean and North Africa, and part 3 will be the HAWKER Hurricane holding the line in the Far East until March of 1944 and beyond. So, the Battle of Britain prevented the German invasion in 1940 and gave Britain some breathing space. But if we were to lose the war on a strategic scale, it would be lost overseas. For Britain to survive, it needed to keep the sea lanes and communications with its empire open. Before the war even started, Britain maintained a sizable force around the Suez Canal, including the only fully equipped armoured division since the evacuation of Dunkirk, supported by a number of Royal Air Force aircraft. But these were often from the bottom of the pile. In fact, our most potent fighter was the biplane Gloster Gladiator. With victory in the Battle of Britain and increased war production, we could at last start to sending better aircraft to guard our overseas interests. But we were still not confident in the security of Great Britain, so no Spitfires would be sent overseas. What was available was the Hurricane. So hundreds of Hurricanes would be dismantled and crated up, many of them veterans of the Battle of Britain and in poor condition. But at least the Royal Air Force overseas squadrons would get a fairly up-to-date fighter. During the Battle of Britain, when it looked as if Britain was staring defeat in the eyes, the Italian fascist dictator Mussolini wanted a bit of the old action and a new Roman Empire. So he set his ambitions on Egypt. And on the 10th of September 1940, an Italian army of over 300,000 marched, if was on parade, into Egypt. Facing them was a Western Desert force of no more than 36,000 soldiers, supported by the Royal Air Force and about 250 aircraft. The results of the battle should not have been in doubt for the Italians, but poor tactics resulted in massive losses and the Italians having to dig in. What the Italians did not expect was later in 1940 for a much smaller British force under Operation Compass to go onto the attack. This is one of the most successful early actions of the British Army and one of the few successful actions of the British Army in the early war period. They drove the Italians back well over 500 miles right deep into Libya. They took 135,000 prisoners, destroyed 450 tanks, 900 guns and lots of aircraft. The war in the air, though, was bitterly fought, but luckily for the Royal Air Force, the Italians also had biplanes, though very good ones, CR-42. One of our pilots was the fantastically named South African Marmaduke Thomas St. John Pattle, better known as Pat Pattle, who I've done a separate video on, and I will leave a link if you want to know more about Pat Pattle. He will go on to become one of the top biplane aces of the war with 15 kills on the Gladiator. By November-December 1940, just as Operation Compass was going ahead, the Hurricanes were getting to the Middle East in bigger numbers, and 80 and 33 squadrons converted to the better fighter. The Italians tried their luck invading Greece in November 1940, and it was about this time Churchill made one of the great strategic errors of the war. So just as General O'Connor, one of our best tank generals, had pushed the Italians right back, Churchill ordered his superior officer, General Wavell, to remove forces from General O'Connor and send them to Greece. The Greeks were doing quite well over the Italians and welcomed the RAF, who again started to knock the Italians out of the sky. Italy, though not happy about the performance in the field of his friend Mussolini, then ordered the German forces to invade Greece, and then put a small force under General Rommel to go to North Africa. And by early 1941, around about end of February, beginning of March 1941, Rommel was in North Africa with his now famous Africa Corps, and soon started chasing this weakened Western Desert force back across the desert. In Greece, the Royal Air Force found itself outnumbered, but 80 and 33 Squadron fought like tigers, knocking many more Germans and Italians down for the losses of their own. But by April 1941, it was a numbers game, and the end was almost in sight in Greece. The Royal Air Force had many aces in the Greek campaign, like Bill Cherryvale, with over 30 kills, very rarely mentioned. But if you look in Corgie's back catalogue, they do a 1/72nd scale Hurricane of Bill Cherry Vale, one of our forgotten aces. There were many unsung Royal Air Force heroes that fought against the most fearful odds, not even seen in the Battle of Britain. One of these was a 19-year-old, very youthful-looking sergeant pilot, nicknamed Chico because of his youth, called Chico Genders, later Jumbo, from Doncaster. Even though he had lots of hurricane hours, he had not yet been given operational experience, and mainly used for taking up aircraft after tests and servicing, or taxiing aircraft around for the ground crew, or sometimes ferrying aircraft. But he got his first taste of action in April 1941 at Larissa Airfield. It was part of a 3-aircraft standby section when over 20 German Bf-109s swooped onto the airfield. Taking off, 2 of the sections were shot down immediately and their pilots tragically killed, leaving poor old Chico to experience his first combat with 20 enemy aircraft on his tail. Even for a veteran ace, these were terrible odds, never mind young, inexperienced 19-year-old sergeant pilot. Though Eric managed to gain enough height, increase his speed, open full throttle, turn and climb right into the swarm with the Bf-109s. A long burst sent one of the fighters into the ground. He continued to fly and fight hard, taking huge punishment to his aircraft, but meting out the same to the swarm. Even with his ammunition expended, he continued to engage the enemy, either through lack of fuel, who knows, fear of the lone Royal Air Force warrior, the 109s left the area, some of them trailing smoke. This was witnessed by many on the ground and his squadron at last knew they got a fine fighter pilot in their ranks. Jumbo Genders claimed 10 aircraft, including 3 Ju-87 Stukas in one mission during the Crete and later North Africa. He was awarded the DFM before being commissioned in 1941. He survived the war, only to die testing Britain's first supersonic aircraft in the early 1950s. The next battle was in Crete. Now, after the British fell back out of Greece, some of the forces went to Crete, including some of the HAWKER Hurricanes, including Bill Cherry Vale. Now, the island of Crete lies kind of east to west. It's got a slightly northern plain, a little bit of a central plain, a southern plain, and mountains ranged down the centre. But up on the north-west coast is Malmini Airfield. I think that's how you pronounce it, Malmini. And this was critical. There were other airfields like Ercolon and others, but they were only good enough for fighters. This main airfield, which is now basically Crete's international airport, was big enough to take the larger aircraft, and the Germans knew this. So in Operation Mercury, as they called it, they decided to invade with paratroopers. Now, by this time, Britain were using Ultra, so this is the intelligence game from Bletchley Park. And the commanding officer in Greece, which was General Freiberg, knew about this, that the Germans weren't going to try a seaborne invasion, were going to try an airborne invasion. But he still wasn't sure. And all his concentration was on a seaborne invasion. Now, the Royal Navy were in big numbers around the seas around the area, but still, they expected the Germans coming by sea. But they came by air. Now, the British Army were defending this airfield and the other airfields, and the German paratroopers were not like the later British and American paratroopers in Normandy, who landed with support gliders with like jeeps, machine guns on, and anti-tank guns. They had nothing. They landed with their very basic infantry weapons, so things like pistols, rifles, submachine guns, and perhaps MG-34 general purpose machine guns, and thus took vast amounts of casualties. And the British were holding, or the Allied forces and Commonwealth forces were holding them. Then, in a strange decision, the Commonwealth forces evacuated that main airfield and went to, I think, called IL 107, just away from it, slightly higher ground. They realised the mistake and tried to recapture this airfield, but it was too late. The Germans were on it and captured it, and within hours, Ju-52s were landing and unloading heavier kit for the German paratroopers, who now started to turn the tide in this battle. Now, this forced the British, after a series of fights, over these mountains to the south, where the Royal Navy could evacuate them. The Royal Navy, as a point of note, lost ships and stuff in the Pacific, and of course the North Atlantic. But their main losses in the Second World War were in the Mediterranean, especially the eastern Mediterranean, with evacuations from Greece and Crete. They lost numerous destroyers, cruisers, aircraft carriers and battleships in these battles. Yes, they beat the Italians in the Battle of Matapan and held the superiority in the sea right through the war, but at great cost to evacuate the British Army. Some of the Royal Air Force ground crew formed themselves ad hoc infantry companies, and actually, to say they got not a lot of infantry training, including some of the aircrew, fought very well, including guarding some of the passes that were being evacuated by the army, and resulting, it was an absolute disaster was Crete. And again, we lost some like 11,000 prisoners and 4,000 killed. It was horrendous, and including things like commandos, they were there, including the commando led by Lord Lovat, who somehow managed to scuttle off, end up in Egypt, leaving half his commando or most of his commandos behind. But just as the Greek and Crete battles were ending, Rommel started his big push in North Africa. And again, the Hurricane had to try to hold the line throughout the rest of 1942, 41 and into 42. During 1941, the Hurricane was joined by the Curtis P-40 Tomahawk, and then in early 42 by the upgraded P-40E, which the Commonwealth calls the Kittyhawk. These would have to do combat with the Bf-109E and later Bf-109F. Many have wondered why it took the Royal Air Force so long to send Spitfires to the Middle East when the Western Desert Air Force was really up against it. Some Luftwaffe aces had a field day with the likes of Hans-Joachim Marseillie knocking down over 150 Royal Air Force aircraft in this arena. And again, I've done a separate video, which again I'll leave a link like the Pattle one, so you can look at if you want to know more information about Marseillie. But for all the Luftwaffe races in the Western Desert, the Royal Air Force's Desert Air Force never really lost total air superiority in the bigger picture. In fact, the three services, Royal Navy, British Army and Royal Air Force, worked much closer together in the Mediterranean, resulted in better communications and making the very best of what they had. Back in Britain, the Royal Air Force were committed to the fighter sweeps across France, as we mentioned in our Spitfire video, episode 2. This resulted in almost nothing gained, and hundreds of aircraft and valuable pilots lost in those fighter sweeps in 41 and 42. If some of these Spitfires could have been committed to the Middle East, the RAF Fighter Force would have had a much easier time against the Luftwaffe. The Hurricane was now starting to struggle, but at least improved versions of the aircraft started to appear. And many of the fabric aspects of the Hurricane, like on the wings, were replaced now by metal skins. The first 600 were built with basic fabric wings. But the rear part of the Hurricane's fuselage remained fabric for the rest of its service career. Armament had also improved, with the Mark IIB with 12 machine guns, and later the Mark IIC, you see the two die-cast Hurricanes in black and grey, armed with 4 20mm cannons, and the Hurricane 2D with the 1/72nd scale aircraft down on the bottom right, armed with 2 40mm cannons, which became the nightmare for German tank formations in Libya and Egypt. In 1942, the Curtis P-40 had started to take over all air superiority roles as under 15,000 feet, where most of the combat in this area was fought. It was as good, if not better, than the Bf-109F, equipped with 6 massive, hard-hitting 50 caliber machine guns. This left the HAWKER Hurricane for ground support duties supporting the 8th Army. And on many occasions, when Rommel had got the better of the 8th Army, only to have Hurricanes, Bowfires, P-40s and Martin Baltimores stop them in their track so the 8th Army could escape and regroup. Starting in mid-1942 in Malta, where the Hurricanes and earlier Gladiators and Sea Gladiators, and obviously Sea Hurricanes, had been trying their best to defend the island, the first Spitfires were deployed overseas. Malta was deemed more critical than North Africa at the time, so it had to be secure. Then, in August 1942, Spitfires were at last deployed to North Africa, but only in small numbers, and it wasn't until the Second Battle of Al Alamein that Spitfire 5Bs were there in larger numbers. From this point, Rommel was really on the back foot. But the work of the Desert Air Force, coupled with close cooperation with the Army, provided the basis for future tactical air forces today. Even Montgomery, in one of his quotes, stated, "In a battle, if you lose the air superiority above you, you'll lose the battle and lose it quickly." The senior officer who commanded the Desert Air Force went on then to form 2nd Tactical Air Force, or 2TAF, that supported the Allies in their push to defeat Germany in 1945. And it was no coincidence that Eisenhower picked a former commander of the DAF, Arthur Tedder, to be his deputy during the invasion. Arthur Tedder had shown a willingness to work closely with other services and nations to get the job done. So that's episode 2 of our HAWKER Hurricane series. The hurricane in the Mediterranean and the Middle East. I brought some of the models down to give them priority, and you'll see there's 3 Desert Hurricane kits, all by Armour, which are an exceptional brand. So you've got the Hurricane Mark 1 Trop that's just coming to stock. That's at £49, but it's an excellent value. Either side of 272nd scale. So you've got on the left, you've got a Hurricane 2C Trop, and on the right, you've got a Hurricane Mark 2D Trop. So the 2D is about £28, but the Hurricane 2C is about £23. So really good value. So thank you for watching episode 2 of our HAWKER Hurricane series. Just before I leave this, when we lost the Battle of Crete, and that terrible disaster of evacuating that critical airfield, Churchill was absolutely fumed. Yes, the British Army were at fault for evacuating that airfield and leaving it basically undefended. But a lot of Churchill's fury was actually against the Royal Air Force for their personnel not having the training and the ability to fight like infantrymen. So this resulted in 1942 at Belton Park in Lincolnshire, the formation of what is now known as the Royal Air Force Regiment, which its formation happened in 1942. In the third episode, when we talk about the hurricanes in Burma, I will talk a little bit about the heroics of the Royal Air Force Regiments defending, capturing and recapturing an airfield that was critical to operations in Burma. And recently on the news, as we're speaking now in April 2026, news coming from the Middle East that members of the Royal Air Force Regiment, using their missile systems, this new kind of missile system, have shot down loads and loads of drones, far more than the aircraft of. In fact, about 4 or 5 of these Royal Air Force Regiment gunners have actually been credited as aces with shooting down the drones. But yes, so this is where the Royal Air Force Regiment came from that disaster in Crete in 1941. Once again, thank you very much.